In the last episode, we talked about proto-writing, and I promised that today we would talk about the true birth of writing. Well, I'm not one to break promises, so why don't we just jump right in here. Welcome, friends, to the history of writing. What we know about the story of true writing starts in Uruk, in what is now modern-day Iraq. Uruk covered less than a square mile, but it was an urban center surrounded by secondary settlements and is now generally considered to be the first city in world history. As with any budding city, Uruk was quite the economic center, and like any good economic center, it had to keep accurate transaction records. This is where writing came in, or, to be more accurate, this is where cuneiform came in. Cuneiform is distinguished by its wedge-shaped marks, which is where the form gets its name. The Latin cuneus, meaning wedge, and forma, meaning shape. Using a straight-pointed reed called a stylus, the symbols were engraved into clay tablets, and it's worth noting both the reeds and the clay were widely abundant in the city of Uruk, meaning that the clay tablets were exceedingly cheap to make. Once inscribed, the clay was either baked in a kiln or just left in the sun to dry, after which it was, for all intents and purposes, indestructible. Its only real enemy, excess moisture or flooding. Which is why, given the Uruk and modern-day Iraq landscapes are pretty barren, we've been able to find so many tablets in such great shape. And the earliest ones show what I talked about last episode. That is, they showed proto-cuneiform, which were pictorial and based on pretty concrete, visible concepts, like an object you could hold in your hand, or the leader or king, things like that. But these same symbols started to be used for more complex subjects through what is known as the Rebus Principle. In a basic sense, the Rebus Principle is the use of existing symbols, in this case pictograms, purely for their sounds. Their meaning doesn't matter. All that matters is the sound that they represent. Trust me, you've seen this before. Ira Spar, from the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, has provided a fairly simple example that we can check out. Here we have a sentence written in symbols used specifically for the sounds associated with them. Taken together, we get the statement, I can read. We only have a few examples of this in cuneiform, and by all intents and purposes, it doesn't seem like it lasted very long at all. In just a few hundred years, if that, the good accountants of Uruk moved on from proto-cuneiform to a true system of writing, one characterized by complex combinations of word signs and phonograms. But not everyone knew how to use this new writing system, and that was exactly by design. To prevent records from being forged or duplicated, those who wrote the cuneiform receipts, most always men, had to undergo rigorous training, after which they were entitled to be called scribes, or, in the ancient tongue, dobsar. Scribes and their apprentices were the only ones who knew the cuneiform language. Which also meant they were part of the privileged elite. Despite so few knowing how to read and write cuneiform, across its 3,000-year span, it was used to write 15 different languages. These included Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Eblaic, Edomite, Hittite, Old Persian, Sumerian, and Urartian, along with a few others. Note this is pretty important. Like our modern-day alphabet, the fact that cuneiform could be used to represent multiple languages meant that it itself was not representative of a language, but it was a writing system. Now, because of the tablet's relatively indestructible nature, we have a lot of examples that we can study and learn more about. This is my personal favorite. Discovered in Uruk, it was created about 5,000 years ago and describes allocating beer rations for workers. That's right, a worker's paycheck was beer, which, lucky enough for them, was also one of the most popular drinks in the region at the time, probably because it doubled as a food item given it was loaded with starches. Note the symbol for beer, which looks like something of a conical cup, like something you would get for a snow cone. I want to say, I did try to get a sample of the Sumerian beer, which Great Lakes Brewing actually revived back in 2013. And at the time, it was described like this. Sumerian beer smells like vinegar and ginger, looks cloudy and brown, and tastes sour and tartar than any beer you've ever had. That sounds delicious. Great Lakes also did a modern take on the recipe, which they call Gilgamesh, after the king of Uruk and star of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, I tried to get some for this video, but it's currently out of season and I can't order it anywhere. I can't find it anywhere. But if I do, if I happen to come across it at some point, I will be sure to come back and update this, or at least provide a new video follow-up, because I really want to try it. Let's go back to that Epic of Gilgamesh. It's easily the most famous piece of known cuneiform, and fragments of it have been found all over, including in Israel, Syria, and Turkey. As I said, Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, and within this piece of literature, which also happens to be the longest piece of literature found in Akkadian, we also get a different account of the Old Testament flood. Pretty cool, right? The final example I want to touch on is actually a horde of examples. It's known as the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, named after the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, who also happened to be a scribe. He was a passionate collector, sent scribes all over the empire to find pieces to add to his library. And what we found in the library is a collection of thousands of clay tablets and fragments, including a copy of that aforementioned Epic of Gilgamesh. Story also holds that Alexander the Great saw this library and was so impressed, so moved by it, that he decided to go back and create his own library. We may talk about that another day, but it's worth noting that the Royal Library of Alexandria, as it would be known, is most infamous for actually burning down. And when that happened, most of the scrolls and books inside were lost. So there's something to be said about using indestructible clay, I gotta say. There's one last point I want to make before we go, and it harkens back to the last episode of the History of Writing. In that one, I noted how there are several writing systems we simply, at least to this point, can't translate. There are others, such as the Egyptian hieroglyphs, we're only able to read thanks to such artifacts as the Rosetta Stone. With cuneiform, the translation process was a wee bit different. So cuneiform was abandoned in favor of the alphabetic script at some point after 100 BCE, and it was lost. For centuries, travelers to the region would take note of these scribbles, these little wedge shapes, and they would inscribe them, and they would take them back with them, and they would report on them, the fact that they saw these amazing things there. And they thought they could be read. They thought that they could be scripts. From the Roman traveler Pietro della Valle, who in 1625 realized cuneiform must be read left to right, to Georg Friedrich Grotefend, who in 1802 assigned some alphabetic values to the symbols based on some recurring patterns he surmised, correctly I may add, were the names of King Darius and King Xerxes, to French scholar Eugène Burnouf, who in 1836 published a cuneiform alphabet of 30 letters. It was some time before the system could be read again. What's even cooler about the fact that they translated cuneiform in this way, though, is that they were then able to use that to translate 3 other languages: Old Persian, Assyrian, and Elamite, as with the Rosetta Stone, which, again, we're going to talk about another day. Identical texts in those 3 languages and cuneiform were found in Persia. All you need is that one key, right? And what you should gather from all this, the point I want you to take away from this video, is that the cuneiform language, the cuneiform writing system, unified this region of the world unlike anything ever had. Every great Mesopotamian civilization used it for thousands of years, allowing these distant lands to communicate and trade openly with each other. I can't illustrate how huge this was. Writing was born. It became this huge wave of information and culture that would never stop. It just flooded the world. The only modern day equivalent would be the invention of the internet. It ushered in new worlds, new cultures, even new jobs. But we'll talk about that more in the next History of Writing. For now, if you like this video, please give it a like, give it a share, or subscribe to the channel. You can also head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting to get these videos even earlier, get them as soon as they're ready, and even access exclusive content, including behind-the-scenes looks and blooper reels. Trust me, I have a lot of bloopers. But until next time, thank you for coming. Keep on writing.